Who's the boy that can laugh at a storm cloud, turn a frown into a smile for free? Who's the kid with a heart full of magic? Well, everyone knows. It's Butters.
That's me!
After doing a thorough evolution video for both Randy Marsh and Kenny McCormick, I think it's finally time that we cover my other favorite character, Leopold Butters Stotch. While Butters didn't really properly emerge as a key character until a few seasons in, it's impossible to imagine South Park without him at this point. Outside of the main four boys and Randy, I don't think there's any character more integral to the show. It's rare that Butters doesn't get a speaking role in an episode these days, and episodes that focus on him are often among my favorites. So, join me in Butters' very own video. You know, with how many bullies are out to get Butters, he could probably benefit from the use of a VPN, like today's video sponsor, Private Internet Access. Private Internet Access is a VPN that's been downloaded over 30 million times and can help you protect your personal data. Public Wi-Fi networks are not secure, and since PIA offers service on unlimited devices, you can ensure that your information is secure wherever you go, no matter what device you're using. On top of your personal security, PIA also allows you to access region-restricted content from all over the world. If you didn't know, certain streaming services have entirely different media libraries in different countries. Currently, Rick and Morty is only on Max in the United States, but if you use PIA to connect to Japan, you can watch Rick and Morty on Netflix right now. Watching Netflix without PIA is like paying for a 3-course meal, but they just bring you food from the kids menu. Signing up for Private Internet Access is risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and if you sign up using my link in the description, you can grab an 83% discount on Private Internet Access. That's just $2.03 a month, and they also add 4 extra months completely for free. PIA works great for me, and you should definitely check it out as well. Just click the link in the description and give Private Internet Access a shot today. Butters has technically been a part of South Park since the pilot episode, though he didn't have any spoken lines of dialogue, but he's always been a part of the main class of kids. It's actually kind of wild how early they had all of these character designs. But we wouldn't hear Butters speak at all until season 2, when we got a couple of instances of quick lines, but these don't sound anything like the Butters we all know and love.
Pass this up.
Pretty much just a generic kid here. They hadn't really characterized Butters properly yet. He's also featured pretty heavily in the background of South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, and I guess technically he has speaking lines since he's part of a chorus of singers in multiple songs, but we don't actually ever hear his voice. In fact, this is basically his one real moment in the entire film, at the end of the La Resistance medley. However, eventually Matt and Trey decided that they wanted to imbue a bit of personality into the character, stemming from their now longtime animation director Eric Stow. In fact, this was even how they came up with his name.
And we started calling him, he's our buddy, he's our little buddy, he's our Butters, who's my Butters, and then he became Butters, and then we're like, we're gonna put you in the show, Butters.
Yeah, and he's like, well, you better not, I'll get awful mad.
And we wouldn't get that voice or characterization until season 3's Meteor Shower trilogy, when Stan is forced to hang out with Butters, Pip, and Dougie at Mr. Mackey's party. And honestly, for the most part, Butters is pretty fully realized here. At least on the surface, he feels like the Butters we've known for years.
Well, I sure am glad you're here, because then we'll have even more fun than we was having before. We were having an awfully good time before you showed up too, however.
There are a few pretty interesting tidbits in this first Real Butters episode. For one, he's immediately seen hanging out with Dougie, and we know they reconnect in later seasons. We'll touch on that. And second, when they're playing, he says this.
Hey, you know what we could do with these lady clothes, huh? Why, we could play Charlie's Angels.
We know Butters loves to play as characters. It comes up a lot later as well. And this wouldn't be the last time he dresses up like a girl either. This episode mostly focuses around Butters, Stan, and Dougie trying to warn the drunken party guests that there are militarized police outside and that they're in danger of getting Waco'd. It's a really difficult task, and it gives us our very first Butters puts his foot down moment.
If you don't get outside right now and tell those army guys you're not religious fantastics, there's gonna be heck to pay. Heck, I tell ya.
We'll see a handful more of these over the course of the show. Like I said, it's pretty wild how much of Butters they had kind of worked out this early. Stan even coerces him into ziplining out of the house to get the newscaster a tape that stops the Waco-like disaster. Butters is always getting coerced into things he doesn't want to do by people, and he really helps save the day and proves himself to Stan here. But it's Butters, and as we'll learn over the course of this entire series, he almost never gets a win.
You think you had a bad night? I had to hang out all night with these friggin' Melvins.
Oh, dude, weak.
Super weak.
Truly, so many aspects of what make Butters such a funny character in South Park are here, and he would start to play a more prominent side character role in the show very regularly after this. Though his next major side appearance is the one instance I feel he was a bit mischaracterized. In Hooked on Monkey Phonics, they make him kind of a bully.
And if you don't follow our rules, well, we're gonna duct tape you to the bench.
Pretty much the entire episode, Butters hangs with Craig and these other kids, and they just find new ways to bully the homeschooled kid, which, while kind of funny because it's Butters, feels very un-Butters-like. But the show was still easing into using Butters, so I cut him some slack here with his characterization. And especially because after this, they really start to flesh out Butters as a side character, and we start to see smaller traits emerge that would go on to make Butters such a fun and beloved character. In Cartman Joins Nambla, we start to see the ways he's easily coerced by Cartman into stuff he doesn't want to do. Cartman gets all the kids trapped with the North American Man-Boy Love Association and convinces Butters that he's the one who needs to take one for the team.
Well, sure, I'm a team player, I guess.
An early example of how people, Cartman especially, take advantage of Butters' kind-hearted nature. In season 4, when the kids start a boy band, Butters auditions.
Little buddy foo-foo, I don't wanna say you. Scooping up the field mice and popping them on the head.
Thank you, Butters. We're letting you.
Butters is undoubtedly a huge dork, and this is one of the early examples of him proudly displaying his dorkiness to the other kids, particularly something dorky that's art-related. Butters in general cares a lot for others as well, and he's one of the first people that showed sincere concern for Timmy when they all learned about hell and confession.
I mean, poor Timmy's gonna go to hell. He can't confess his sins because all he can say is his name.
The season 4 episode Wacky Molestation Adventure once again shows Butters' penchant for taking on character roles.
Oh, well, I'm the mechanic, I guess.
Most of the town devolves into absolute chaos, but Butters just kind of decides to be the town mechanic. Though later we see once again how much of a pushover he can be when it comes to the other kids telling him what to do. He just fully accepts that he's going to be the next child to be sacrificed.
I'm gonna be sacrificed to the provider.
In a very crappy Christmas, the boys hire Butters to make them cardboard cutouts for their Christmas animation, another example of his interest and talent for weird art forms. The boys are actually super impressed with him here too, but despite how impressed they are and how much Butters saved their asses, they of course won't include him any further.
Hey, I made a little cutout version of me too, in case you need it for your animated film.
No, that's okay.
See ya.
And they couldn't round out the early stages of Butters' development without establishing one of the most important aspects of his life. His parents never stop grounding him, often for no real reason, and we get the first instance of Butters being grounded in season 5's How to Eat with Your Butt.
My mom said to make sure I look good this time in the school pictures.
Okay, smile.
Unfortunately, when the photos come back, he gets in trouble from the school and his parents for making a stupid face. This kid cannot catch a break. He ends up grounded the entire episode, and though the kids try to come and get him to tell him about all the crazy stuff that's going on in South Park, he can't leave the house because his parents seemingly just hate his face.
I didn't mean to look like a jackass, it just happened.
You made a goofy face.
No, that's just what I look like.
His parents even make him wear a bag over his head so they don't have to see the stupid faces he's supposedly making.
I'm not wearing makeup, Dad.
Put that bag back on.
Yes, sir. Dude, that poor kid.
So while they didn't really quite have a unique voice for the character in the first couple seasons or movie, over seasons 3, 4, and 5, they pretty quickly built up a ton of traits and lore surrounding Butters that created a super strong foundation for the character moving forward. And after this, he basically becomes the next leading character in the show behind the 4 main boys, with an immediate and conscious effort to bring him to the forefront more often. In fact, when they decided to actually kill off Kenny in season 5's episode Kenny Dies, leaving a spot open in the group, they close out the season with a story called Butters' Very Own Episode.
Butters.
Well, that's me. Yeah.
Butters' Very Own Episode is such a perfect escalation of everything the show built around him over the first 5 seasons, showcasing his trademark naivete and the absolutely depraved reality of his home life. And it all starts with Butters' unmatched excitement about going to Bennigan's for his parents' anniversary.
Bennigan's? Oh, boy, you mean it? Whoopee! At Bennigan's, I'm gonna get the right hand baby back ribs.
When Butters' mom asks him to spy on his dad to find out what he's getting her for their anniversary, Butters accidentally discovers that his dad has been exploring his curiosities. You know, down at the Stud Cat Theater for Fisting Fireman 9, and, you know, hanging out at the all-male bathhouse.
The White Swallow Spa. Yep, he went there and he wrestled with all kinds of guys.
This episode does such a great job embracing how innocent Butters is. South Park is pretty selective about when the kids do or don't understand more adult concepts, but Butters, he's almost always fully unaware of these kinds of things. His mind is just too pure. So when he tells his mom all of this information, he has no idea that it's going to completely shatter her world and send her into a complete mental breakdown. Butters even catches his dad at the spa again after this, and as obvious as it is, he's just too innocent to understand it.
I'm glad I found you. I think I know the perfect anniversary present for Mom. What are you doing with your wiener out there, Dad?
This leads to Butters' mom trying to drown him in the river during her breakdown, and despite the fact that he is actively being murdered, Butters is just Butters.
I think that, yep, it looks like the car's filling up with water. Yeah, I think maybe now might be a good time to come back inside the car and drive, Mom.
The entire episode is filled with examples of Butters' upbeat attitude shining through when things just fly over his head.
I need some goddamn poontang.
Yeah, I could use some goddamn poontang myself right now.
But what I love best about this episode is that it establishes one more thing that makes Butters so great. We get another one of those Butters puts his foot down moments when his parents want him to lie about where he's been so that they don't get in trouble with the police.
And when you start covering up one lie with another lie, that's when you get into real trouble. But I've just about had it up to here with you two.
Over the course of the show, one thing that really shines through with Butters is that even though he's completely naive and innocent and he doesn't really understand everything he's experiencing, even when his life is absolutely miserable, he almost always has a very substantial understanding of the larger picture. His perspective on his parents lying here is a perfect example of this, and we're going to get even better examples as we go through his journey even further. After Butters' very own episode, they really start to embrace Butters as a main character. In fact, season 6 is largely a Butters season, at least for a substantial portion of it. But they put an even deeper spin on the way Butters is treated poorly and manipulated by the other kids through his role as Kenny's replacement. The boys even just call him Kenny.
Hey, Kenny.
No, gosh darn it, my name's not Kenny. Kenny's dead, and you're all gonna have to learn to deal with that.
But now the boys tend to rope Butters into doing the least desirable parts of all their schemes by guilting him about Kenny. In this one, they want Butters to gain and then lose a bunch of weight so that they can make money on an advertising campaign, just like Jared from Subway. After Butters gains the weight and then can't lose it, they make him have liposuction, which of course gets him grounded.
What?
Well, I told you my parents were really sore, and they said for having liposuction surgery, I can't be outside for 5 days.
And even after Butters gets grounded, they still manipulate him into going through with more of their plan by using their dead friend as a guilt-tripping device.
Kenny would have done it.
Yep.
You guys remember what a cool friend Kenny was? God, he was always up for helping us out, man. He was the best friend ever.
We see this multiple times through the season as well. The boys really treat Butters horribly in the episode Freak Strike. They even make him dress up like Kenny in this one.
But I'm not gonna wear this coat anymore either. I should be able to be you guys' friends without wearing Kenny's old coat.
They get Butters to put fake balls on his chin so that he can go on the Maury Povich show, and of course they use those exact same tactics that we just saw to get him to commit to it.
Kenny would have done it.
So, I told you guys before, I'm not Kenny. We know. Believe me, we know.
It's such a bummer to see how taken advantage of Butters is. They literally send him to New York on a plane all by himself to be on the show, and they nearly get him in deep trouble with the other freaks who boiled alive the previous person that faked having an abnormality, and then they blame Butters for it.
But they want to kill me for not being a real freak.
Oh. Well, it serves you right for screwing us over.
This entire chunk of the season is really just the boys treating Butters terribly. When they all go to Aspen together, Cartman just keeps giving him a Hitler, which I'm pretty sure you can figure out what that means if you just look at this image. There's a great moment where Butters actually lets loose and expresses himself by dancing, and of course, this is Cartman's reaction.
Butters, I hate you with every inch of my body.
Eventually, this all reaches a big boiling point. A turning point for the boys and for Butters himself. And while Butters should have been the one to walk away, that's not exactly what happened. The boys eventually decide that their friendship with Butters isn't working, and they basically fire him, incredibly formally.
I love being you guys' new friend.
Yes, well, Butters, it's just not working out.
And this completely breaks Butters. We actually finally see him acknowledge and embrace how sad and broken his life is. Butters changes, no longer his happy-go-lucky, optimistic, kind-hearted self.
I am an outcast. A shadow of a man who can find no companionship. no love from others.
Butters adopts a new persona, one that embraces a life of crime and villainy. And what I love about this is that Butters truly cannot even begin to imagine himself doing bad things. He literally has to create an entirely new personality, a whole new identity, in order to live out his dark and twisted fantasies.
Prepare for the greatest supervillain you've ever seen, Professor Chaos!
Of course, this is still Butters, so the absolute worst things he can imagine doing are actually pretty adorable. He swaps two people's soup orders at Bennigan's, he steals the class eraser and buries it in his backyard, and after Dougie figures out his identity and the two team up and reunite for the first time since the meteor shower party, they attempt to flood the world, but the only way he can think to do this is just by turning on the hose in his backyard. He even spends an entire episode trying to up his game and craft more evil and villainous plans, only to discover the sad truth about every single one of them.
Simpsons did it.
I really love this sequence. Butters lists off ideas from a ton of Simpsons episodes, including Who Shot Mr. Burns, The Telltale Head, Marge vs. the Monorail, The Computer Wore Menace Shoes, Lisa the Skeptic. Love to see South Park giving the Simpsons props. And it's also funny that they were talking about how the Simpsons had done everything back then.
I've watched all 132 episodes of The Simpsons twice.
We are currently at 750 episodes, nearly 6 times as many as there were when this episode aired. Wild. But after the emergence of Professor Chaos, the show did start to give Butters a little bit more of a wild streak, not simply relegating him to the most pure and innocent kid possible, in small doses at least, and this emerges a bit more further down the line in the series, but later this season, Butters accidentally watches a porn tape instead of Lord of the Rings, corrupting him into this golem-like existence.
Butters, what the hell are you doing? You're playing Lord of the Rings. Get the hell off me! You're a freak, Butters. You can't play with us.
We even start to see Butters get really uncomfortable with Cartman when they form a Christian band together in Christian Rock Hard. Butters is so pure and innocent, he really struggles to maintain this deceit.
If I'm lying, may the Lord strike me down right now.
And the episode ends with Butters unambiguously telling Cartman off in one of the only times we ever hear Butters say the F word. It's just a shame that he didn't maintain that attitude, because for most of the rest of the series, Cartman really starts to take advantage of Butters in crazy ways.
Fuck you, Eric.
Obviously, one of the biggest through lines in Butters' life is that it is deeply sad and unfortunate, and this manifests itself in a lot of different ways. One of the absolute most common types of Butters stories in South Park are of the Cartman messes with Butters horribly variety. We've obviously seen hints of it already, like the Nambla episode and in Aspen, but this is where it really starts to become a recurring focus. The first major instance is the episode Casa Bonita, where Kyle decides to take Butters to Casa Bonita for his birthday instead of Cartman. This leads Cartman to lie to Butters about an incoming meteor and convince him to stay in a bomb shelter so that he doesn't show up for the birthday dinner. Butters is such a sweet little guy that he is so grateful to Cartman for saving him.
Wow. Eric, I can never thank you enough for everything you've done for me.
Cartman goes to extreme lengths to make sure Butters isn't found before the Casa Bonita trip, and Butters ends up living in the literal garbage dump for a week. In season 8, Cartman pretends to be a robot called Awesom-o that's programmed to be Butters' best friend. Also, he can learn new things about Butters to rip on him for. It's so sad how much Butters loved that robot, too.
He's my best friend in the whole world. He's my...
Though fortunately, this is a time where Cartman gets more than he bargained for. He stays in the Awesom-o suit way longer than he intended because Butters has a video of him dressed up as Britney Spears dancing with a cardboard cutout of Justin Timberlake. That's a long sentence. When Butters eventually discovers the truth about Awesom-o, he shows everyone the video. Occasionally, Butters comes out on top in these conflicts, but not often. Cartman really makes Butters go along with a lot of his bullshit. In Go God Go, Butters is the one to help Cartman freeze himself so that he doesn't have to wait any longer for the Nintendo Wii. In Super Fun Time, Butters gets paired with Cartman on a field trip, and Garrison tells him they cannot stop holding hands until they're back on the bus, which Butters takes very seriously.
You can let go now, Butters.
No.
Butters, come on.
No!
Cartman ends up dragging Butters to the nearby Super Fun Time arcade, and they have a rough time trying to sneak back in later, not realizing that there's an active hostage situation. A really rough day for Butters.
Teacher, My partner is back on the bus.
Another time, Cartman manipulates Butters into thinking they need to do something to stop the Chinese government from taking over, so they hold a P.F. Chang's hostage, in very racist outfits, might I add. Cartman forces a gun on Butters, and he ends up shooting a bunch of people in the dick. Cartman also convinces Butters and a few other classmates to fly to Somalia to become pirates, which goes shockingly smoothly, all things considered. He also once convinced Butters that he was in virtual reality when he actually wasn't, and Butters took the opportunity to punch his dad in the nuts, and then he goes out into the world and gets stabbed. Oof. Once Cartman made Butters fake his own death so that he could pose as the new girl in school, Margarine, and infiltrate the girl group to steal their future predicting device. Pretty messed up. Also, I can't believe it took me this long to realize that margarine is a play on margarine, aka fake butter. I feel very stupid. But even the girls rip on Margarine. Butters just has the worst luck. Though they do eventually come around, and he actually has a really fun time as Margarine. But this one ends on a dark note. When he returns home, his parents think he's resurrected from the dead and chain him up in the basement, killing people to feed him.
I'm sorry, son, but you're a demon spawn now.
Oftentimes, Cartman and the Stotch's parents' cruelty are intertwined. A couple other episodes highlight this really well. In the death of Eric Cartman, all the boys at school start ignoring Eric because he ate the skin off of all of their KFC. Cartman assumes this means he's dead, so when Butters actually acknowledges him, they think that he's the only one who can see or hear him. Cartman drags Butters along to help make amends to everyone he's wronged, but unfortunately, this also leads the Stotches to believe that Butters is having a mental breakdown, and they take him to the hospital where well, I don't think I can actually show this, but it looked traumatizing. Similarly, in the episode Cartman Sucks, Cartman continually pranks Butters by doing things to him while he's sleeping, and he takes a photo of him in a compromising position, another thing I probably can't show or even talk about explicitly, but it leads to Butters' dad believing that Butters is bicurious and sending him to a gay conversion camp. Butters is too innocent to even understand what's happening here. He has no idea what the camp even is, he just goes along with it, but it's a pretty horrendous thing for parents to put their kid through. Butters' accountability buddy nearly tries to jump off of a bridge, which leads to another one of Butters' greatest end of episode speeches, telling off the people who run the camp and saving Bradley in the process.
I wasn't confused until other people started telling me I was.
And these weren't even the only times the Stotches unnecessarily sought professional help for Butters. At one point, they send him to a psychiatrist who claims he has multiple personalities, even though they just seem to be the characters Butters likes to play as.
Postman Butters. And yet another is Fireman Butters. And then there's even Inspector Butters and a Professor Chaos.
I do love that they included Inspector Butters and Professor Chaos, two characters we've seen him play in previous episodes here. And unfortunately, the doctor they send him to turns out to be mentally unstable himself. He does some really fucked up stuff to Butters and manipulates him into putting himself into worse and worse situations, getting him into even more trouble. Another time, the Stotches tried to sell their son to Paris Hilton.
Mom, Dad, I love you. Please don't sell me to Paris Hilton.
Yeah, that's real. They had to at least think about it for a bit, but is anyone surprised where they landed on this one?
I'm afraid we just can't sell you our son for $200 million. It'll have to be $250 million, cash, up front.
It's hard to understand why Butters' parents treat him this way, especially because he's actually got unrelated trauma in his past as well. And this is something they seem to have empathy for. In season 8, Stan tries to recruit Butters to his dance troupe since he was a state tap champion, but they reveal that in the national championship, Butters accidentally flung his tap shoe off, making lights fall, killing 8 people. The biggest tap tragedy since 1954. And on top of this, when Butters overcomes that trauma and decides to dance with Stan's troupe, he immediately does it again, killing his opponents. Tragedy seems to follow Butters wherever he goes. And Butters' parents aren't even the only ones in his family to abuse him. We eventually learn that his grandma also straight up bullies and beats him.
Do something, you little bitch. Your grandma's bitch.
The ways his Nana bullies him in this episode are so dark. She tries to force him to eat a urinal cake. She continually hits him and makes fun of him. Butters is such a sweet and innocent boy that the only way he could think to stop her was to be Professor Chaos. And when he finally makes that move, she's waiting ready in her own villain costume, even more diabolical than before. But this episode is actually a really great example of Butters' ability to overcome adversity. Because though he realizes that there's nothing he can do to stop his grandma's bullying, he also knows that in the end, he will be the one to win. Butters can endure, and his grandma will get old and she'll get frail.
I'll come visit you. I'll come just to show you that I'm still alive and I'm still happy. and you'll die.
But not everything in Butters' life are things that just happen to him. While he has all of these tragic aspects of his life, and he seems to endure and overcome so much, he has some pretty massive wins sometimes, and he also has some pretty massive failures that are actually entirely his own fault. One thing we see a surprising amount of from Butters is a little bit of business acumen. When he sees an opportunity for his own success, he often will take that opportunity. One of the first instances of this was in The Tale of Scrody McBoogerballs. Upset about The Catcher in the Rye being disappointing for a banned book, the boys write a disgusting manuscript called The Tale of Scrody McBoogerballs. But when Sharon discovers it, she is both wildly impressed by the writing and also cannot stop vomiting. Avoiding trouble, the boys gaslight Butters into saying he wrote it, only to realize that the parents think the book is a masterpiece. Butters fully takes advantage of this opportunity when the boys try to retake credit.
No, we really did write it. Tell him, Butters. I wrote that.
And honestly, this was great to see. The boys have been so mean to Butters through the show. I love to see him Uno reverse card them and just tell them off here.
Let me tell you something, fellas. You always take advantage of me, and after reading Catcher in the Rye, I've learned you're nothing but phonies.
Unfortunately, Butters ends up writing a second book called The Poop That Took a Pee, and that book somehow inspires somebody to murder Butters' biggest crush in the world, Kim Kardashian. Of course, Butters was devastated. Truly an episode of highs and lows for Butters. And that's not the only business venture that takes Butters to some rough places. After Butters pays a girl named Sally for his first kiss, he gets to thinking about starting a career.
Jeez, I'm gonna start having lots of responsibilities soon. I gotta start thinking about a career.
He decides to start working with Sally to start a kissing company. What started as Butters trying to start a business and be responsible turns into him straight up becoming a pimp. Of course, Butters is so innocent, he has no real idea that this is what he's done, but after taking advice from some other pimps, he really starts to change for the worse.
Oh, hell, Dad. I got lots of girlfriends. Sally's just my bottom bitch.
By the end of this one, Butters does give the entire company to the girls, which was the right thing to do, but sometimes we see Butters' business ambitions really conflict with his usual sense of morality. A great example of this is when he started selling vapes to kindergartners at school. I mean, what can we even say to begin to justify this? It feels very out of character for Butters. Of course, you won't be surprised to learn that Cartman was the one who coerced Butters into this one. The pair of them even plant a dead body on their vape connect. This is probably one of the worst things Butters has ever done. Sometimes Butters' business abilities combine with his other personality quirks too. In franchise prequel, Butters uses his Professor Chaos persona to basically run a misinformation corporation out of the old Circuit City, training people to post falsehoods on Facebook, slandering the other boys' superhero personas. This was one of the most effective business operations we ever saw him run, though he did of course eventually get super grounded. Though one time Butters was actually able to stop himself from being grounded by becoming one of the vamp kids, though he seemed to think he was an actual vampire.
Well, I'm sick of being pushed around by my dad, by kids at school.
And yeah, even though he looked like a huge dork, he actually ended up helping the goth kids destroy the source of the vamp's power, the Hot Topic. So even though he got grounded in the end, I'm calling this one a win for Butters. Ditto for Imagination Land, which I have an entire separate video about if you're interested in a deeper dive. Butters is tragically left behind in Imagination Land during a terrorist attack, and even though all he wants to do is go home, he's needed in Imagination Land because he has a imagination. Butters is basically the chosen one in this fantasy epic, the kid taken from his home because he has a special power, even though he does not want to have that power.
Oh, I'm the key? Could I not be the key, Morpheus? I don't want to be the key.
Butters eventually reimagines all of Imagination Land after it gets nuked, saving everybody, one of his biggest wins. Though again, still grounded afterwards. High highs, low lows. Butters is shown to be an impressive leader in general, like when he got lost in Mexico and became known as Mantequilla. His followers would definitely go to the end of the earth for him. Or when he and the kids started playing Sarcastaball. This was a sport that perfectly fit Butters' personality and skill set.
It's about sportsmanship and compassion.
Butters hyped up the entire team by complimenting every single person, and it actually worked. And when they needed a new coach, they went straight to Butters.
We need you, Butters. You're the man.
This one ends not so great for Butters though, and I'm Pretty sure I cannot say why. It's gross. Check that one out for yourself. One of Butters' biggest ever wins actually came in one of the most recent episodes of the show, Dick and Bow's Hot Dogs, and it showcased so many of the things we've learned about Butters over the series. Butters gets a job at an ice cream parlor. As we know, he's very hardworking and business-minded, but classic, Cartman convinces Butters to get him a job there, which he obviously does poorly. Eventually, Cartman instead decides to open his own restaurant at the hot dog stand that he and his mom have lived in since season 25 by using the money Butters earns as their startup costs. Cartman builds the most incredible restaurant all through Butters' hard work and then fails entirely to run it. But you know who runs it perfectly? Butters. No surprise there. And to get back at Cartman, he sells the restaurant, and Cartman has to move back into his old house. The moment the hot dog stand becomes a place he actually wants to live, he's forced to go back. This, in my opinion, is one of Butters' biggest wins, and also an episode that showcases so many of his strengths. Kind of a perfect Butters story, but there are actually two Butters stories that parallel each other and showcase the opposite ends of the spectrum for Butters' possibilities as a person, and they both involve his love life. In season 19, Butters starts dating a Canadian girl named Charlotte, who is tragically deported back to Canada. That's a pretty typical sad Butters storyline. They continue long-distance dating, but then in season 20, in solidarity with the other South Park girls who break up with all of the South Park boys, Charlotte breaks up with Butters. And honestly, this sends Butters down probably the darkest and least Butters-like road we've ever seen him on. He basically becomes a men's rights incel type.
The truth is, girls hate us, Eric. They're sick of our shit. And one day, they plan to make us obsolete.
Butters basically rallies all of the boys in these little men's rights protests by taking his wiener out during the national anthem. He gets them all to march down the hall, hanging the hammer. But the interesting thing is the deep juxtaposition to the last time we saw Butters' heart get broken, in the episode Raisins. In that episode, Butters mistakes a waitress's flirtations with him as genuine interest, and he thinks that they start dating. When he learns the harsh truth that she never actually cared about him, he's absolutely heartbroken, straight up just sobbing in the rain. But when Stan and the goth kids try to commiserate about how awful life is, Butters rejects the idea, claiming he actually just still loves life, despite the heartbreak.
And I'm sad, but at the same time, I'm really happy that something can make me feel that sad. It's like, it makes me feel alive, you know?
This might be my favorite Butters quote in the entire history of the show, and it's one of the reasons that I just love Butters' usual perspective on life. Despite the awful stuff that happens to him, usually not at any fault of his own, he still finds reasons to be his kind, optimistic self. And I think that these two stories of Butters' very different reactions to heartbreak are actually a great example of the two potential paths his future could take. And they're actually two paths that we have seen play out. In the South Park post-COVID specials, we get a full-on look at Butters in two entirely separate futures. The primary one being this horribly depressing dystopian locked-down society. And in this future, Butters is known by the name Vic Chaos, and he's locked up in an asylum because he is simply too dangerous to be let out. Butters seems to have entirely adopted a new personality to cope with some of the trauma in his life.
I think Butters was a twerpy little loser kid whose parents didn't love him. My name's Vic Chaos.
But his personality seems to encompass so many of the things we've learned about Butters. His ability to convince people to do business with him is a full-on supervillain power.
I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. NFTs are gonna blow up. You should really get in now because they're really the future.
He basically gets people to give up their entire life savings for NFTs, bankrupting people and leaving a literal trail of death and destruction in his path. It stems from things Butters has a knack for, business and leadership, and of course his Professor Chaos tendencies, but it's focused in a completely unethical, selfish way that is completely antithetical to the Butters we love. But when the kids manage to change that dystopian future and stop it from happening, Butters' future changes too. Now, he's working at the Applebee's Denny's Max, baby.
Butters, you're still working here, huh?
Yep, I just made manager. I love doing actual shit. that pays actual money.
Not only does this attitude just feel more like the Butters we know, but it also connects to his history in the show. Butters literally serving people just feels right, but also he's made manager. He's showing his leadership skills in action. Plus, he's working at a restaurant that isn't all that far off from his absolute favorite place in the world, Bennigan's. It's so fascinating to see the different places a character like Butters could go. And while there's always the possibility that he could go down those darker paths we've seen before, I like to think that Butters will have a happy and optimistic ending. Butters is a weird, quirky little kid. He has endured some of the harshest bullying from his classmates and from his family. He's been through some of the toughest tragedies of any character in the show, and no matter how good of a person he is, it seems like those wins are just so few and far between. But that's what makes Butters' unending optimism so inspiring. Because if somebody who is constantly beaten down by the world so thoroughly can be this hopeful.
The only way I can feel this sad now is if I felt something really good before. So I have to take the bad with the good. So I guess what I'm feeling is like a beautiful sadness.
What's stopping you?
I stay mellow watching Johnny Two Cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny Two Cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.